And as I always say, everybody should be here for this. It's Amanda Hopper and Sean Fry's presentation, Employee Engagement from Disney to Your Library. So hopefully everybody should be in the right room. I already messed up the phone number this morning, so we got it straightened out. So hopefully we should be good to go. Thank you all for joining us this morning. This session is being recorded. So if you have any coworkers that couldn't make it, we will post it on our website later. And then at the end, of course, if y'all have any questions along the way or at the end, feel free to put those in the chat box there at the bottom of the screen. And when we're definitely finished for the day, of course, most of y'all are used to clicking the red X in the upper right-hand corner to get you out of Adobe Connect. So I'm going to close my mouth now, and I'm going to turn it over to Amanda and Sean so they can tell y'all what y'all came here today for. Thank you all.
Good morning. My name is Sean Fry, and I'm with Amanda Hopper. We are both the assistant directors here at Boone County. And what we're here to talk about today is a training we attended. We went out to Disneyland, and kind of tying into our conversation before we got started, we sat in a basement for 2 days in Anaheim, California, learning about how Disney does their customer service training and employee engagement. And our presentation and slides today are based upon what we learned and where we are in our process of taking that information and getting to a final product of the employee engagement. So we're obviously not there. It's a work in progress. And what we try to do throughout this is we tell you kind of what Disney told us and then how we interpret this information to work for our library. And obviously for every single one of you, that's going to be a little bit different. And so we've got throughout this presentation some questions built in to where you can think of and process and figure out where this fits to your library or maybe where it doesn't, just based on a number of different factors that kind of come through in this presentation. So Amanda and I have been working on this roughly, I guess, for about a year, a little over a year, but we've never been presenting in this environment, so we probably will talk over each other at points. So we'll do our best not to do that and try to be somewhat concise, and then obviously any questions we will get back to you and try to answer the best we can.
Yeah, so I'm sure it'll be an experience for all of us because, again, it's always been kind of a discussion model that we've had, and Sean and I typically have a little bit of banter going back and forth, so you may or may not hear some of that going on. But yeah, we are both the assistant directors here at Boone County Public Library. Sean oversees the branches, and I oversee the youth services and outreach. So we are going to go through this, and Sean is going to start out a little bit with an introduction, and then again he and I are just going to kind of go back and forth. So if you have any questions, please put it in the chat box. I'll try to keep my eye on that and answer any questions you may have.
So the very first thing in the two courses we took in training from Disney is this introduction that they wrote up. And I believe they use this for maybe all of their training. And the point is, the most important line kind of that I took from that is that they've learned to be intentional where others are unintentional. They use the term over-managing, not as micromanaging, but putting a lot of time and effort into any part of their process. And an example a little bit away from the employee engagement when they talk about over-managing was that they figured out by watching people with trash that someone would walk 32 steps before they would throw a piece of trash on the ground. So if you go to a Disney World, Disneyland, all the trash canisters are roughly 32 steps apart. So that's the kind of over-managing. So where you take something that finite, small of a detail, but then impact of how that looks towards your park, how that looks towards the user experience, and then you correct and design for it. So when we talk about over-managing, we're talking about really getting into the weeds on some of these things. So we'll touch a little bit on that. And now we're having technical difficulties on our end. I'll find the power cord. You can take the next slide.
Okay. So yeah, we were so focused on the right phone line that we forgot to actually plug in. So Sean's going to get that taken care of while I talk. So after we came back from Disney and we started talking about this over-managing, one of our staff members decided,
You know, it looks really gross when you're walking into the building and you have the all the cigarette butts in the tops of the trash cans or with the sand. And so she figured out a particular tool that made it really easy for her to scoop out the cigarette butts. So each morning, she would get a volunteer to scoop out those cigarette butts. Now that's not something huge, but it's just something a little bit extra that that she could do to make the place look tidy. And because Walt Disney used to talk about how people notice perfection. So that's just one instance of trying to make things a little bit more perfect. So hold on, we're still just trying to. So part of that goes back into engagement of your employees. So if someone is not engaged, are they going to, sorry, Sean is distracting me with trying to plug in to the power cord.
Yeah, we're still on top of this. We don't actually have our laptop plugged in, and then we got the little sign that said we have 8% power. So the two of us are running around in a computer we're not familiar with. Okay, we're logged in now, so we're ready to go.
We're good. Okay. We are so sorry. So engagement, what is all of this engagement anyway? Well, it's a commitment to the organization. It's the ingredient that fuels people to perform the way you want them to. It's the common thread that connects your people and your business. So you can look at engagement for your particular organization in terms of how effectively staff work there, how long staff generally stay at your organization, and how motivated they seem to be. I did a little bit of research in terms of engagement, and the numbers to me were astounding in that 63% of employees are not engaged. And this not engaged means they lack motivation, they're less likely to invest effort into the organizational goals. So you can think back to your employees and try to decipher, do you have people that feel like they're not motivated? Do you have people that don't really seem to be invested in your vision, in your goals, or what we're going to talk about a little bit later in terms of the culture of your organization? So I got this image from, as you all know, the Toy Story. So, and in Toy Story, they definitely had a culture. And an organization's culture is complex. It is. It's not the rules or the mission or the vision, but it's more deeply rooted than that. And it's the culture is how you do things. Around here. And an example of this here at BCPL is that one of our locations, the manager has instituted a Hawaiian shirt day. On once a month on a Friday, all the employees wear a Hawaiian shirt. So at that particular location, part of the culture is this really fun environment where they do different things like that. In our full organization, we have a culture of a little bit of lateness. So most of our meetings, everybody runs about 5 minutes late. So most of our meetings don't start until 5 minutes after the hour that they're supposed to start. So, those are just a couple little examples. I'm sure you can think of all kinds of things at your organization that might go back to your culture.
Okay, so kind of beating on this a little bit more. So we're looking at how people behave and what you want, your desired behaviors of your employees, or you can even go a little bit further as far as that is, what is the desired behavior of your users, your patrons, your customers, the desired behavior even of, your community as far as your stakeholders, meaning like your board and going on and so forth from there. So your behaviors reflect how you want your employees to act. And then the thought is when you put all this together and you take all your good behaviors and you have what you want, now you've created your desired culture. So taking kind of the idiosyncrasies in, and this is what you work on to foster this positive. So touching on the reference a little bit earlier, we talked about, a staff member who's taking the time without being asked to clean up cigarette butts in front of the building. It's, how do you encourage that behavior? You acknowledge it, and then, what do you do at that point to make sure that, people know they're supported and understood and that you care. So we'll touch on that a little bit further down. So continuing on, so the culture, the way we do things around here. So why does this matter? Very basically, you start attracting talent. Quite a bit of studies are out there that, like-minded people tend to work with like-minded people. So if there's a certain attitude or behavior or flexibility, Amanda and I are discussing this and going over it. Think about some things that people who work at libraries just completely take for granted. And we found the most disgusting, but how many staff would have had to clean a bathroom without even thinking about it or waiting for someone to do it. The staff just did it. That's kind of a unique to library culture. So your employee engagement, your happiness, your overall happiness of people, happy employees tend to stick around, and your overall performance of your organization, which is always important when you're looking at scrutiny from your public, how you want to be projected, how you want people to think of your, you want people to have positive experiences when they come to your library. You want them to come back. Just to say, the same reason why you spend all your time on your collection, you spend your time hiring your programmers, all that stuff. You're trying to have an overall performance. So what affects your culture? So your leadership. Obviously, if you're listening, you're a part of affecting this culture. Your people, and that is your staff to your community that's around you. And then work environment. And we took that work environment, and when we started doing this and we started to kind of tear it apart, looking just specifically at Boone County. So you look at how, in our case, how this county's grown. I think in 1990, so just 27 years ago, the population in Boone County was 56,000 people. Now it's 135. So how does that impact how the library works? How does that impact how people perceive services? From going from, 20 miles outside of Cincinnati, in their mind very rural, to where it is now, where you're seeing, strip malls and housing developments, and how does that affect the culture of the library and affect, it had an impact on this library of where they decide to build branches and the traffic flows of people. Okay, so and now we're starting to look at our process, and you look at your process, that's what you can control. So you can control, you're trying to control your values at your library, looking at what is unique about your job. So having a full understanding. So when we were discussing this, we're like, yeah, most jobs haven't asked someone or thought of someone to go in to clean a restroom before, a program or something like that. We looked at kind of desired behavior, and we're looking at kind of, as you're seeing this shifting mold and mentality of what is customer service desk, we want people who are flexible, who can answer a reference question, who could do a story time, who could do, we're looking for a certain person to fit into what is the Boone County way. And so through all this process, so we're looking through our culture, what impacts it, what our process is, we're trying to figure out who we are. So how do we see ourselves as a public service entity in this day of change? Is it, are we more than books? Are we more than programming? How does our community see us? And how do we want them to see us? How do we attract the positives on that? And so that is what we're talking about creative culture. So this is...
So
we only talked to each other once so far. So
that's enough. That's enough, Sean. You've gone long enough. So here's where we're going to reflect a little bit, or we're going to ask you to reflect just a little bit and think about your organization. Does it have a well-defined culture? And a lot of times you have to think about this. So I'm going to shut up for just a second so you guys can think a minute. And this is where I would love to hear a little bit too at the end maybe, or even now, you guys can comment and to talk about, yeah, we feel like we do have a well-defined culture. We have those idiosyncrasies that, that all of our staff do this or that. We found out with our organization when we were doing some reflection ourselves, and when we brought this back, we had a system-wide staff day. And we asked this question of all of our staff, and what we found with both managers and employees is that we don't have a very well-defined culture. Different people felt very differently about what BCPL is, what the culture is, and that's okay. So we know, all right, we're not where we really need to be, but we can get there. And so this training really helped us in terms of, okay, how do we now, knowing that we need to define our culture a little bit more, how do we, go back and move forward with that? What kind of culture do we want? And how can we take the things that staff had told us and the managers had told us that they felt like the culture was, and then how do we incorporate all of that into one culture for our organization? Now, if you're a larger system, you may have culture at your different branches.
Yeah. And that's really, I mean, we already knew it, but it's kind of like getting it out there is that, I think it comes kind of easy for branches to kind of get off and be in their own little island of service, which is not bad. It's kind of the point. You put someone away from the main branch as a way of service, but that creates very unique cultures. And then also the patrons that use them are a little bit different. There's obviously common ground, but we were finding that our community was divided, not in a negative way, but just in how they used each one of our branches.
So another part of this culture and finding out what the desired behaviors are and finding out more about the culture of your organization is to look at your best employee. So think about your best employee. And we had this no need to say it aloud out when we did this training for our staff. You don't have to raise your hand and say, oh, Sarah Smith is my best employee. But so when you think about that employee, what are the top 3 characteristics that make him or her the best? Are they a real go-getter? Are they really flexible? Are they able to program all ages, anything? Or, are they willing to, clean up pee off the carpet in the children's area if asked? So, in looking at your culture, you have to think, what do we want it to be? What are the desired behaviors? So an example with Disney is that, or not a specific example, but George Kalogridis, the president of Walt Disney World, says the Walt Disney World Resort in Florida, says, our cats do what they do because of our culture. A culture in which every person here understands how important and how special a Disney vacation is to each guest. Yet it's not the magic that makes it work, it's the method, a very deliberate process that is reinforced by the leaders. So that kind of goes back to that, the picking up of the cigarette butts or the 32 steps to the trash can. So I don't know how many of you have seen Office Space, but if you have, it's a funny movie. If you haven't, it is a funny movie. So in Office Space, the guys working there, they were not very motivated. They had leaders that weren't very good leaders. And so motivation, it's not that I'm lazy, it's just that I don't care. And then this lack of motivation can stem from a lack of communication from the leader to the staff. It could be a breakdown in the relationship with the supervisor or a lack of pride in the organization. So, thinking back again on your organization, does your organization foster that employee engagement?
Okay, so now we're going to start kind of breaking down even more into the library culture. And so they divided through Disney into these 4, your heritage and tradition, your shared values, your language and symbols, and your traits and behavior. And so to spend a little bit more time is so on talking about like heritage, they refer to as you capture the stories and put them together in a way that showcase your timeline and communicate your stories to your employees. So, a lot of library systems can, some can go back and say, we were founded after a Carnegie grant, or we started here because, it was a group of women in the 50s that were very dedicated to reading, and so a lot of your libraries are going to come from a heritage story such as that, and how that kind of builds on your tradition. You were established because your community wanted a library, and how did your community want this library, or what did they want from this library? So that's very much, your tradition and your values, and I think some of us, in a very generic sense, do a better job of capturing that than other libraries. And it started us when we saw this to kind of start evaluating kind of how we see our library and kind of where we started from, and how to bring that in together. And this is tying back to a few slides ago, as we're looking at kind of the heritage of this community. This is a community with a lot of transient people who have been here, a short amount of time, or grew up somewhere else and then moved to Boone County for a number of reasons. So you have like a community that's mixed as far as their heritage and traditions towards this community and what it means. So something that just happened 20 years ago may be unknown by a lot of people who moved in. So how do we establish and kind of looking at our heritage and tradition? We have a really strong local history department too. So it's like, how do you tie that in? How do you tie your history of your community? How does that tie in and reflect your library? So that's kind of something we're already working on, but now kind of thinking of it purposely, and that's kind of where we get back to that whole over-managing. So we already have that information. You already hire really good people, and you get this desired behavior, but how did you do it on purpose as a process instead of just a byproduct of, well, we got really lucky here and this worked out well for us? So our shared values, and that's creating a system of shared values that lets every employee know what your company stands for. And we spend a lot of time, just like I'm sure everybody else listening to my voice, is that we spend a lot of time of how important it is to serve our community, and we want to be there for people, and we want a positive experience, and all these things. Well, how do we codify that? How do we put that down? And then that's our shared value. And so Disney said they went back to these real terms for their shared values. It's openness, respect, courage, honesty, integrity, diversity, balance. I mean, that's not really hard for as far as us to kind of believe and get behind. Language and symbols is what is specific language to your business, and that got us thinking and reviewing kind of like, what are all the terms that we use every day that someone who doesn't work in a library might like, what's an ILS, what's you can think of any other example too, but how non-FIC, how often, or JFIC, or stuff terms that are very comfortable and normal to us. How is that part of our language and symbols? And then our traits and behaviors. So what behaviors exemplify the traits that you want? So we've talked about this quite a bit, but providing clarity to how things are done. So take the time to determine the distinguishing features of your organization. So what is a distinguishing feature of your organization? And it can be just as similar as any library, but also going throughout the Commonwealth, there's little differences in a lot of how libraries do things. So what is your distinguishing how you do things around here kind of adage?
So taking all that into consideration, a big component of what we do in the libraries is the selection process. And Sean and I were talking one day about some different staff members and how it's so easy, or different managers, how it's easy for a manager to just take someone who's already trained, already has the skills, may already be an employee, and put them into a role that you may need. But sometimes this path, this easiest path, is not necessarily the right one. You have to really think very, very closely about what is the cultural match for your organization and those desired behaviors. So it may not just be skills, because skill can be taught. How to work an ILS can be taught. How to look up a book can be taught. But some of those soft skills, that the personality, the friendliness, the willingness to go above and beyond, those things can't always necessarily be taught. So you really have to take the time to search for the desired behavior in your candidates, and not just look for the skills.
And on top of that too, it's and you get a feeling, you know this, but also trying to find that right personality that fits within the staff that you already have is sometimes very important too. You're looking for balance and diversity in thoughts and staff and stuff like that. So also being able to find out and going, this person's the right fit, and here's the reasons why. On some of those, they stressed a lot about the idea of, it's better to limp along without you than to limp with you. So sometimes, even leaving a position open, which is, that's so easy to say, and especially Amanda and I try to be real aware of this as far as on an administrative level. It's very easy to say, well, you'll be fine without that staff person as you're covering the Saturdays and you're working nights. And so we know that there's kind of just a desire to try to fill that as quickly as possible because, a schedule's inconvenient. If you lose one or two people and then someone's sick and then now you're just completely changing that. But to try to get that across that, these short-term annoyances are worth it for long-term balance and benefit of the organization. And then having that culture in place where people kind of have an idea of what we're looking for and what we need. So this kind of caused us to look a lot into our training and training beyond. I mean, fortunately, we were sent off for some really great, amazing training, and what can we get from that? But also taking a look in a process that Amanda and I and our director will go through, and anyone else kind of involved in the process. But trying to decide, when there's a conference, is this the right fit for what we need? Is this the right training? And it kind of caused us to look a little bit outside your traditional PLA, ALA, national conferences and start looking at stuff like, would we benefit from going to a customer service training somewhere? Or are we more of a nonprofit, so looking for nonprofit technology conferences and skewing a little bit away from library conferences because, we're involved in KPLA and to an extent KLA and stuff like that. So we kind of felt like we're getting that through being in Kentucky, but what national conferences can we go to? So that caused a kind of just an evaluation of how and why we send people to training and kind of a lot of what we get out of it. And part of that process for us for training is we sent some staff, some YS staff to a conference in Indiana, and they came back and said, well, we're kind of ahead of things, not as an insult to Indiana, but kind of where we were. And so we thought that was a really good benchmark. So where we are geographically, it's really easy to send people to Indiana or Ohio. I mean, Ohio statewide conferences are like a national conference as far as vendors for as big as the state is and the budgets they have. So when we send people those things, we're trying to figure out, okay, where are we at? Where are we seeing these trends? Where are we picking up? And then, we also take an evaluation looking at our training. We look at employee comments, but also patron comments. I don't see a lot of complaints across my desk. I can't think of any where someone is upset with customer service from our staff. So, and part of it feels like, okay, I think we're getting that across. I mean, they've listened to us drone on quite a bit about it. It's effective, and not only is it effective from us, it's not saying we're the reason for it, is we're bringing in people who are quality at this, so they get that. So now, if we think we're doing that, we don't let up. We continue on with this customer service, and every staff day we have a little part about it, but now what next do we need to work on? And like our case for training, so we've changed it kind of as where we're looking at now, okay, we just switched to ILS. So now our training has completely changed. Our training has gotten into more of the weeds of what the actual job is, not in these, very specific skill sets. Also looking at, too, is that, what is good right now isn't necessarily going to be good next year. So it is this constant process of evaluating, reevaluating, and then when people go to these things, coming back, and we always say, tell me 3 things. It doesn't need to be a paper, but tell me 3 things that you got out of this conference, and then what's your recommendation for sending people next year? Is this something we need to do? So that's how we've taken these training opportunities because, we take the money seriously. We take the opportunity that we have at Boone County very seriously. So we want to get the most out of it. And that's kind of like part of our culture is that we have some great opportunities, but we're going to get something great out of these opportunities. So tying in our traditions as far as that, and so constantly updated. That is that.
Yeah, so, and I'll just throw in part 2 of our training process here at BCTL is that when a new staff person comes in, they are trained on all aspects of the library system. So they will go and spend a half an hour with PR, or they will go and spend a half an hour with IT or local history. And that helps with our culture of being more system-wide, We program as a system. We offer services as a system. So we really want to show that as part of our culture. So when you come into BCPL, you're expected to know what PR does, and then how your job affects that person and how their job affects you. And so we really feel like that gives a close-knit, system-wide approach to our new hires. And then making sure that we do take all of the trainings that we go to as administrators, bringing that back and constantly updating our materials with the newest, most recent information that we can into those trainings.
Now, and also, in all honesty, it may sound like it's very official and we're really on top of it, but, it doesn't always work, too. We've spent a lot of time. We spent probably 2 staff days, and this is in talking about the conversion to our ILS and our training, speaking to staff about it, explaining what this change would be like, going through that, and then, of course, when we switched over, we had a lot of, no one ever told me, we didn't know. So, we're not here preaching to you all that we've got the answers figured out. We're kind of more explaining our process. It is very frustrating, being on that side of it when you've been working in an administrative role to try to get that information out, and you meet with as many people as possible, and then there seems to be a genuinely, concern or surprise of when a change has been implemented. And then also part of it too is, and with the multi-branch system is kind of the joke is that we train them here at 2 weeks at Maine, and then the minute they do is they go out to a branch and they work as hard as they can to forget everything they learned those first couple weeks at Maine. And that's kind of such as life, that standardization that you strive for, but, so being kind of mindful of that and knowing that we're never going to be hitting those markets, but that doesn't mean we're going to stop. But that's just kind of lessons we've kind of learned on this process is right when I think I've done a really good job talking, that no, probably doesn't. And then also, learning your communication style, because there are such limits to email. But if you're in a larger place, you sometimes have to send an email. And where I would prefer to go face-to-face and discuss with everybody, but I supervise people who are not in the same building as me. And so, I have to rely upon email and phone calls, and even that, the minute I get done talking to one branch manager, they're talking to another branch manager as their best way to conspire against me, and of course the most loving, charming way as a coup can be. But so those are just some of the things, and that's, you keep going after it. It doesn't matter, because I've been in that branch manager spot doing the exact same thing, so I can kind of at least relate and understand. And that sometimes, you have your locations, or, it doesn't even need to be locations. You can have one part of your building almost working in a kind of an opposite. And that sometimes it's good to foster that uniqueness and that culture in people, but then, the overall essence has to be there. So those are some things that we balance and we try to work with. Like I said, I'd love to tell you all that we're just brilliant over here, Amanda and I, but we fall short of these goals too.
Well, no, I mean, we are brilliant, but of course we fall short. And with communication, you can communicate until you're red in the face, and you can think that you have been over it and over it and over it, and inevitably there will be something that falls through the cracks. I was just talking to the IT department not too long ago, and they were talking about some printers that had been purchased, some printer copiers, fax machines, and how they thought that they were kind of on top of things, but it turned out that they hadn't actually emailed the right people or enough people, and so there were certain branches that were confused about it. And so it just shows you that you're always going to have that. But really trying to be as intentional about employee communication as you can, to really give them a heads up when things are coming down the pike, get their feedback, and then to really, when they do provide feedback, to listen intentionally. So now we have the adorable Dumbo with those big ears. You just can't resist. But so when you're listening, really being intentional about how you respond, using empathy with your staff. The communication between you and your staff is a reflection of the culture of your organization. So if you want employees communicate well and to show consideration and empathy with your customers, then you need to exemplify that behavior with them as well. So when you have a conversation with a staff person, it's making sure that you're looking them in the eye. It's making sure that you give those nonverbal cues, such as nodding your head. It's making sure that you're not, when you're having the conversation, you're not thinking about the report you have due at the end of the day, but it's really listening to what they're saying in that 2-minute conversation.
And, you know, an example I had is recently we increased the price for copies from our branches, and the information wasn't rolled out as smoothly as we'd hoped. So some branches were finding out about a 10-cent increase, which is a pretty big increase, especially percentage-wise, the day of, like 10 minutes when the vendor came to show up at their branch to change the machines. And so that's, you know, it's kind of a fail on our part. So now it's like, well, how do you make it right? You know, we're not going to roll back the price. That's kind of been done. That's a decision that's been made. But how do I, in that in that situation, deal with the branch manager who's very upset? Not even so much with me, but you know, as a quote unquote the admin as a whole. So okay, so how do we make that right? And in the end, you know, they're not going to be happy because the decision's not going to change, and this is the way it's going to be. And that's the frustrating, annoying part about leadership, or maybe some people enjoy angering their subordinates. But you know, the decision's not going to change. But now, what can I do to make sure I don't damage that relationship, and know that, you know, I value the fact that you have, you know, someone on your staff who thinks it's their job to stand up for the patrons, or in their idea of patron rights, or, you know, stand up for their people. Well, how do they do that? So how do we take that energy, you know, negative at first, and walk away with at least a positive conversation, and moving forward to ensure, you know, hey, this won't happen again. This is why, and we move on from that. So that internal communication, that empathy, and that listening, you know, it is definitely a two-way street. And like Amanda was saying, you know, being able to clear, which is easier said than done. It can be so hard when you know, all of you, I'm sure, you know, spend an excessively amount of time of multitasking, where you look at your day as the things that you want to do really, really well, and the things that you just simply had to get done. I always kind of think of the equivalent. My last semester in college, I ended up having to take like 21 credit hours or something like that, and I had a lot of classes with a lot of B's where well, I'm not going to lie, I probably wouldn't have gotten an A, but theoretically, I thought I could have got a better degree if I was able to focus on that. But, you know, you're taking 7 classes, you just got to get done. And so that's kind of that, you know, that balance of being that manager, supervisor, where you're sometimes in that frustrating thing of balancing, you know, your multitask. But we're saying, you know, your most important balance is to give your attention and focus and be able to listen, which, you know, it's easy to say in a webinar, but, you know, it's sometimes really hard in application. So that ties into caring. So we care enough to let you yell at me in that situation. You know, and I look at that as kind of a positive if we can have that open conversation both ways. So at least I know where the frustrations are coming from, and I can try to work to address it. And so what we did forward on that situation is get that branch involved with some new innovative stuff that they're going to roll out first before the other branches in the system. Some ways to, as a test market for patron services. So we want, it goes both ways. You get what you get what you give, I guess I should say on this one. So, you know, encourage staff to exhibit the same care for customers, and you know, our commitment to the organization. So what we're saying by that is, you know, I guess the proof is kind of in our interaction with the community. And when we're out and people find out, you know, we work for the library, they usually use that opportunity to tell me immediately what they think of the library. This, I'm sure, happens to all of you. You know, I do find that people, especially in Northern Kentucky, seem to have trouble deciding or knowing the difference between what county they live in. So I hear a lot of feedback about Campbell and Kenton and what they do in Cincinnati. But also the feedback, you know, we get from people, what they think of the Boone County Library. And, you know, it's really, really positive. And when it hasn't been, you know, how does that care and that establish that relationship between the employee and staff to correct that and to make things right? And so that is something I think we're doing pretty good on, is that two-way conversation, but it's a process. You know, and that's kind of what we're getting out of this information from Disney, is that, you know, when you care for your staff, which I'm sure all of you do, you know, it goes both ways. And so, and trying to get that point, like, you know, how do you care for me? I personally wish that my supervisor would care for me more by giving me a couple months off at a time. I think that's the kind of care Sean needs, but that's I guess not unfortunately going to happen.
No, because then it would all fall on me, and I would be overwhelmed.
It'd be unfair, yeah.
Sorry. Yeah, so I'm going to give a couple examples of that. So from Disney, the example that they gave was back from the Disney park in Tokyo. So they had a custodial cast member. Everybody's called a cast member, whether you're a custodian or you're princess, you're a cast member. So a custodial cast member who was also an artist and aspired to be a Disney artist was creating characters out of flower petals and water on the sidewalks. And so when his boss saw him, he said, rather than tell the cast member, you cannot make Disney characters out of flowers since you're not an animator, please don't, do this on the sidewalk, he encouraged him to do that and told him that it was a great idea and that it engaged the guests as they enjoyed the characters too, just made out of water from a broom. And so this art changed from flowers and water to more and more engagement with that employee, and that employee actually growing in the organization, but also becoming more engaged in his own job. So he may think, I'm just a custodial cast member, but look at the happiness you're bringing these kids making Mickeys out of water on the sidewalk. And then to take that to more of a library, we in YS, we take all of the Storytime programmers will rotate bins for their story times in the system. So instead of each programmer having to create a bin each story time, they each create one at the beginning of the story time session, and then they rotate it out. So they have a lot more time for being a lot more caring for being a lot more caring by showing them that their time matters and by taking away some of those hassles of their work.
And that's kind of when we talk also about caring, in that depending obviously on your role in the organization, but looking at ways to eliminate, as we're referring to it as kind of, hassle-free work. So what are some ways of irritations that, Amanda and I look at that we can try to move that'll help our public service staff? And this is more, reflection upon us. So obviously your situation will be different, but it's kind of like I feel that I've been in this role for just over 2 years, and that being in a strictly administrative role is a lot different than when you're working at a branch. And so, what we think is a hassle is not always the same thing the branch thinks is a hassle. So that's kind of like one thing I tried to do when I got here was, for a while there, I believe youth services would meet separately from the branch managers. So what I did is I brought them all together. So it helps because we're all doing public service. So obviously the concerns are usually really close to being the same. And so bringing that group together as a whole is a way to try to knock out barriers and make that communication more effectively, so we can hear and they can hear, and then we have these meetings where you only have to go to one meeting. So sometimes, you get to a point, if you can save me from a meeting, that is really, getting rid of a barrier, because I'm trying to do, think of whatever task that you're working on, where that, your time becomes such an important commodity, or I need to be on the desk. So if you can avoid me from being somewhere else, I can focus on the mission of the job.
Sorry, I was just responding to the chat.
So looking through now, and so we're taking this information, and I saw that someone had a comment earlier about, and I'm sorry, whoever said it, but talking about how, looking at their building and their library as a family, and that's an important term. Well, I was listening the other day, and these pictures to the left, that is Cleveland in January, and the picture below is South Beach, Miami in January. And this is, a basketball analogy, not that I'm a huge Cleveland Cavalier fan, but that, if you're LeBron James and you have the option to go anywhere you want to work, and you can work in a state that doesn't have taxes, or you can work in a state that does, and you're looking at the difference in weather, why, would you ever pick Cleveland over Miami? Who makes that decision? Well, and the general manager of the Cleveland Cavaliers was talking about the culture of Cleveland and what they're trying to do there. And he said, if you're looking at all your metrics and how all these different organizations compete, we're the same as just everyone else. there's nothing different. He said, what we're trying to do in Cleveland is we're trying to raise a family. And they look at that decision of raising a family and how they attract people, how they bring people in their organization, and why people stay. We look a lot when it comes to, let's say, pay. Well, there's a library to the north of us that pays probably $2, $3, $4 more an hour than we do. So why are you going to pick Boone County over Hamilton County if all things being equal and you have the choice? You know, what can we provide? What can you get here that you can't get there? There's just different culture. Now, I'm not saying they're not trying to raise a family. I'm not saying we look at kind of that paternalistic as raise a family, but we look at, you know, what is the culture going to attract to people? So when you're going after and you're competing with many different library systems near you, you know, why pick Boone? Why go in this direction stuff? So we kind of looked at the analogy of what Cleveland was doing. So they're kind of, with all things being equal, and actually it's not equal, they can't pay, no matter what, they can't pay what they can pay in Miami. So all things being unequal, how do you compensate and overdo that? And, you know, all of you have your own ways and your own methodologies of trying to keep your staff or bring your staff in. And that led to kind of like a lot of conversations on our part about employee engagement, like how long should a staff member be somewhere? You know, these are the kind of conversations we have because it's sometimes healthy to have someone who's like, I'll be here 2 years and then I'll leave, or sometimes it's like, I'm going to give you 27 years. You know, so that diversity of your staff and ideas and people coming and going. So that's some of the stuff when we talk about your culture and what we're getting at is we're looking at, you know, we want to attract the best and brightest talent, and not only while they're here, you know, once we bring them in, we want to keep them and we want to keep doing, you know, outstanding work. So look at the analogy as one thing is we're, you know, we're trying to raise a family. So, you know, maybe that's where we're headed, maybe where we're going. We're still in that process, things still change. But that is how one organization tries to, you know, to stay and be the best.
Right, and Sean was talking to me yesterday about libraries, and that kind of goes for libraries in general, too. And why work at a library? You can make so much more money someplace else. Well, it's kind of like any of those social service or education degrees. It's, you know, why is it that you like that library culture? And then what is it about that library culture that you feel you can embrace as part of your own individual library?
And two, we also learned going through this process of talking about culture, and we tried to include staff in a lot of this in these conversations, and I, with a little bit of sarcasm, I said, well, we've learned really the people who really are concerned or think about this culture a lot are us, and our staff was like, okay. You know, I mean, the joke was, you know, we spent all this time on staff day, and they're kind of like, well, that's real interesting culture. So is lunch? That's still at 11:30, right? We're still on for lunch. So, you know, I think kind of too, as you have these conversations with yourself or your board or your staff or kind of where you go on it. I mean, I wouldn't be surprised either if you find yourself maybe really motivated and interested in this, and you get a healthy yawn from other people. I think of when I worked in another library system, and I had a staff and someone who was really excited and really wanted to work at the library because it was 3 minutes from her home, and that was the only motivating factor. She was an outstanding employee. You know, she wasn't going to sit around and get in a conversation about the latest article in, you know, Library Journal and what this means of the role of libraries in the future. She was a great employee, but her motivation was in a completely different place because the library was 3 minutes from where she lived, and that was conducive for her picking up her kids after school. And, you know, that's okay, too. I mean, so that's kind of also, you know, learning when you get in these motivation, these employee engagement. Some of the engagement reasons are really simple, and that's fine. And I think as a supervisor, that really helps. If you know what motivates your staff and what fires them up, you know, some people like the opportunity to go down to Lexington and go to KPLA. They're really excited, and they'd like to present, and they want to talk to other librarians. And then other people would think that would be like, you know, a punishment to have to leave and spend the night not at home or so on and so forth. So that's also part of it, too, is that going through this process is we've learned that no one's really going to get as geeked up about it as quite possibly as, you know, maybe a couple people on the senior management team really get fired up about this. And that's also fine, too. So those are kind of some of the lessons we've kind of taken away from this, or at least I have.
So I want to reiterate what Sean said earlier in that this presentation, we could take hours on employee engagement. So this was just a very broad overview of some of the things that we have learned, some of the things we learned in our training from Disney, some examples that they gave us, some more library-focused examples that we have that we bring to you from BCPL, just as an impetus for you to think back to your own individual organization and the engagement of your staff. the culture of your organization, the desired behaviors that are there, and what you really want to gain from this. And, if there's any more, Sean and I have talked about if there's any more desire for an in-depth employee engagement, we can always look at doing that in the future. But this gives you a nice, good foundation for what we learned at Disney and how we brought it back to our libraries in Kentucky.
Hey, thank you very much.
Thank you. And any questions, we will hang out for the next, we got about 10 minutes, I guess, so we can answer questions.
You have one right now.
I see that. So, I shared the one about the cigarette butts, but even more than that, Sean and I, there was a part of the training where we got to go out into the into Disneyland and walk around and pick out different things that we saw that from the overmanaging perspective. Oh, well, there's a jiggly plug over there, or oh, there's a cord running across a street. The things that we found were very few and far between. I mean, we had to look really, really close for something that was wrong with this place. But it encouraged me to come back to my organization and look around the building for things that if I were a customer and I were coming in and I were looking for perfection, what would I see in my library? So immediately when I came back, I saw some speckle on the walls in some of the buildings, or some where the carpet was worn. So it made me think a little bit more about facilities, the show aspect, as Disney calls it, of our buildings.
Yeah, and then to touch on that question where you said to take away one thing, I think what I took away from it was to do things on purpose. We have exceptional, employees, and just like everyone does, and they do great things. And I think they've gone through the years of just kind of happenstance they would get acknowledged, or oh, whoops, by the way, hey, good job. And so, how do we take that? Like, how do you take the time to thank someone? And I've noticed, and you all may have different, but I've noticed that most people in libraries don't like being called out, positive or negatively, in front of a group of people. So saying something loud at staff day to some people is more embarrassing. So also kind of knowing your staff. So I took away from that is, you do things on purpose, and really kind of buying in that whole concept of the process of why you do things. And so once you're doing things on purpose, then how does that go from there? So I took kind of just from this part of the training. I saw another question about what was the training. It was an 8-hour training, and then and we were lucky. We did 2 trainings, so we had 2 days, 16 hours of training for that. And they push you kind of the whole time on this engagement, and they give you a lot of examples, of the stuff that Disney does, and some of it you lose because you're like, well, I don't think I'm going to reassign someone to go work in Orlando after they did a great job in California. So some of that's like, okay, well, how do I take this into a kind of a non-profit, governmental, we're nickels and dimes. How do that acknowledgement stuff? But that's also, taking away from that is that interconnection, interpersonality, that connection you have, is what I'm getting at, with someone, how important that really is, and you're working with staff. So that's something I took from that.
Mm-hmm. So while there was there were a lot of activities, so they would do some activities with us, and all of them were very cute and Disney themed. I thoroughly enjoyed all of them. And then Sean thought they were a little cheesy, I'm sure, but had a good time.
Yeah.
So it was a lot of fun, but it also was really, really intensive training, and they were throwing a lot of information out at you. So we would have some at our tables. We would have activities. Then there would be some presentation style with PowerPoint slideshows. Then there was time out in the field. So we went out, and like I said, one of the activities was to pick out all the different things that we saw from around. Another really cool aspect of it was we were taken back in the staff work area, and they were showing us how they streamlined the uniform and how it's kind of like RFID. They used RFID and they would scan the item of clothing and they would like kind of check out like a library would check out their clothing, and it made it super, super easy for all of these cast members to check out their clothes. I also saw that there was a question, or I don't know, was that a question? Hold on. Bobby, yes, our library did provide the Disney training. Our strategic plan is focused on customer experience and customer satisfaction for the next 3 years. And so we felt like it was a very good idea to go ahead and put that money towards a nationally recognized customer experience training. And so we were very fortunate to be able to do that. And then we also knew that we could get a lot from that. So we could get that training and then provide a lot of in-house training for our organization. But then that's also why we're providing it for you guys, because we know that there are other libraries that don't necessarily have that CE budget. And so we're really happy to do webinars like this.
And I think I can speak probably for the employees at Boone County that they're tired of hearing about this training. So we've presented it in a lot of different ways, and we did too. So we did the employee engagement, and then there was also a customer service that kind of ties in. So we have a customer service presentation that we did and we worked with too. And like I said, the two kind of tie in quite a bit of points. So we've been presenting roughly around Boone on this for a little over a year. And it's helped kind of in learning kind of the feedback on what we got. And the one thing I enjoyed as far as the training goes, they're very upfront in saying some of the stuff you know. So we're not going to tell you any great mystery or something that you didn't know beforehand, but we're going to tell you kind of how we went about it. And so that's what we're trying to do with this information is to, okay, we're going to take this information, but like we spent a lot of time discussing our tradition and values here as a library. I mean, and relatively speaking, compared to a lot of library systems in Kentucky, Boone's young. It was established in 1974, so there's a lot of systems that are much older than this. So it's kind of like, well, why are we so late to the game? What is the culture in there? What's the process behind that? So I feel that's kind of been helpful in kind of understanding how we got here. Know your past. And so that's kind of also something I took away from this training is they had the advantage of their traditions tied in to one guy more or less, and where he was taking that, and then it's been fed on and gone from there. I think a lot of library systems have maybe had a strong director for a number of years, a strong director now, and that person kind of becomes the personality, the face of the library system. So there's some of the sense to kind of take away.
Hello, this is Alicia. Anybody else? Y'all go ahead and chat in a question, but I have a question for Amanda and Sean, if I may.
Of course.
Okay. Now, since y'all done this, and so what are y'all looking at doing next? What is your all's next kind of plan of attack for your strategic plan?
For BCPL's strategic plan?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
So our strategic plan has two directions. It has the customer experience and it has the lifelong learning. I looked at John for a minute and he's like blank stare.
We talk about this so much we've become almost incompetent in our regards to articulating our own strategic plan because we've been so involved and to completely cut Amanda off in mid-sentence because that's usually what I do. I'm obnoxious like that. But is that we looked at, if you've noticed, it seemed like about 5 years ago every single library got the strategic plan, and then I'm talking like Seattle, Multnomah, Minnesota, all that, and you look at them and they're all alike, or they became these laundry lists of what we think would be great, which I didn't think was very helpful because that's not really giving you a vision of where you're going. It's just like, we want a makerspace. Well, okay, well, why? What is that why part of it? And we kind of looked at that strategic plan as being the why in this vision. So we tightened up our strategic plan by bringing it down to only two parts as an attempt, and based off of this training, one to kind of go in our own direction, but not so much our own direction, is that I thought it was important, and I think Amanda and carried it too, is to have a document that actually has some relevance or importance. I mean, you grind through these strategic plans and you get people on board and you go through this process, and then what? And then a year from now you go, oh, we met this goal or we didn't, or, so how to make this a living document.
Yeah.
And so that's what we really tried to do, and we took that directly from this Disney. So we looked at that, and then we also took that next step. Last year I presented with Jennifer Gregory at KPLA on this. So we took this Disney information too and started looking at our monthly stats and how we capture information. So, so we're looking at these book numbers is a big deal. So now we're looking at these reference numbers. How do we look at the gate count? How do we look at the Wi-Fi? We're talking overall customer user experience. And I feel if it's important enough for you to invest money in, it's important for you to try to get some form of a metric at best possible, because we do get in that touchy-feely stuff really fast. But there's sometimes you need hard numbers when you're articulating to a board member or an outside constituent, why are you spending this money in this direction? Why are you going here? Well, let me explain to you why and where we're trying to get with that. So that kind of ties into in our strategic plan.
Yeah, and we can always send out, if anybody's interested in the library strategic plan, we can send it out. It's a one-page, really easy document. It's 2 directions, and each direction has 3 main goals. So our customer experience is basically listen to our customers, be consistent, and
which that be consistent that's so easy to say,
yeah.
But we're not there. I mean, it's I found that out being in the Air Force. We were tried to be standardized, and we were had our heads shaved and yelled at, and we still couldn't get standardized. So
yeah.
Let alone people with free will, it's going to be a lot harder. But hey, we're trying. It's our process.
Yeah. And then as Sean interrupted me again,
that's how I roll.
The next direction is lifelong learning, and it basically we're focusing on early childhood and seniors. So we really felt like libraries are great at doing everything for everybody, but we really need to hone this down a little bit because it's too hard. You can't do a fabulous job at anything if you're trying to do everything for everybody. So we thought, for the next 3 years, we're going to focus on these 2 subsets of the population that we really feel are growing and need those services, and those were the early childhood, the parents and the children, and then also the retired adults is what our PR person keeps making sure we call it, retired adults.
And that's been really hard for us is in that, we get feedback from the community, we'd survey, and they loved everything we were doing, which in that case, they didn't help us. I mean, that praise or whatever, while it's better than the opposite, fighting with everybody, but it wasn't allowing us to narrow our focus and to resolve and figure out the best way to spend. You only get so much tax dollars, so if we can't spend it all equally on everything at all times. So we were trying to use these surveys to figure out where we should focus our attention, and we decided that, no, we need to tell you where we're going to focus our attention and then go from there. And, it's not like we're letting other groups down, but it's just like we took these 2, the high and the low end of the age years and going from there. And that's still a debate of the retired person. What is a retired person? Is, a 93-year-old the same retired as a 57-year-old? And those have been tedious conversations, but conversations that we've had.
Okay. Thank you all very much. Okay. And yes, going to email out a copy of the strategic plan along with a PDF of the slides when I email everybody their certificate and survey. If anybody has any other questions, please chat those in. I know we're a little over, but it was very good. Sean and Amanda, if y'all have anything else to add, definitely do that.
No, I'm sorry. Yeah, no, thank you very much for the opportunity. And everyone, thank you. I know you all have busy schedules, so thanks for listening to us, discuss a little bit about our journey. It means a lot to us, so we appreciate it. And we're serious. If you have further questions, definitely email us. And if you would like more training, I'm sure we can work something out too, because we took this very serious as far as the money spent for it, and we want to get the most out of this. So any way we can help.
Thank you all so much, and thank you all for participating today. Like I said, I'll hang out in case there's any other questions. But other than that, we are going to call it a day. Thank you all again so much, Amanda and Sean. I really appreciate you all doing this for everybody. Thanks, Alicia.
Yeah, thanks for asking us.
All right, y'all have a good rest of the day.
Bye.
All right, bye.
Bye-bye.
The meeting is now over. All the participants have been